all across the city, including the High Line and the Harlem Children's Zone. I was writing a book about urban design when Hurricane Sandy hit our neighborhood. The book became about urban resilience instead. In Red Hook, as we all experienced, it was our neighbors and the volunteers who helped us. Our social resilience was strong, our physical resilience was not. Afterwards, I wanted to see if science could make us stronger, so I became a professor at the Stevens Institute of Technology just across the river. They had the best data on water in New York Harbor and the best models for predicting floods. What came out of that teaching was a proposal to protect all of Southwest Brooklyn from hurricanes and sea level rise. If you Google my name and type in the words, "The answer is more Brooklyn," you can see that idea on YouTube. About that time, we started organizing more in the community here in Red Hook, with Red Hook Rising and informal meetings to see what we could do to make our neighborhood stronger. We've been promised $200 million for flood protection from the government, but that never materialized. We felt we had to find our own solutions. In 2014, the BASF Corporation, which makes building materials, picked 5 communities around the world that were representative of the challenges facing cities in this century. Red Hook was one of them. They brought a budget for community interviews and community planning sessions, and many of you probably participated in what they called the creator space, or a way to come up with community ideas to make Red Hook stronger. One of those ideas was a model block, a framework for living and working together in the same block in a way that's sustainable and resilient. And here I'll share my screen. See here. Oh, sorry, just a moment. Here, this should be it. Oh, this is it. There we go. All right. Okay, here's a drawing of the model block. The drawing shows the activity going on inside, like looking at a dollhouse. You can see people working, making steel, making art, making food, and you can see people living too. It's a unique building. A lot of people ask me why we call it the model block if it's unique. Well, it's a model for mixing uses on a block, and every mix on every block will be unique. The model block opposes the separation of uses that has been taught in planning schools now for almost a century, where the government says people sleep here, people work there, and you drive or take a train in between. The model block is a model of mixing uses to reflect community needs, which also means that every block in every neighborhood will be different. That's the opposite of planning right now, where the government maps uniform zoning districts across the city. The core idea behind the model block is it responds to the needs of the community. To hear what those needs are, I started a series of planning open houses on Van Brunt Street. And this is what we asked. What do we need in Red Hook? What do we love about Red Hook? And how can we build it into a model block? And this is what we heard. We want jobs, we need housing, resilience, and environmental cleanup. So this presentation is about how we bring that together on one site. All these community goals are long-standing issues. If you map them, environmental cleanup begins back in 1886 when a resin factory was built nearby. Resilience, you might think, begins with Hurricane Sandy, but it goes back to 1860 when our site, which used to be shoreline, got filled in to build houses and factories. Our housing supply, which reached a peak in 1964, was decimated in the 70s and the 80s. And of course, we used to have thousands of jobs, and now we have hundreds. And that brings us to our site, which is 1 block away from where I sit. Our site is the block between Conover and Ferris, Dyckman and Wolcott. To plan this block, we started a community-based process. A lot of people ask me, what makes planning community-based? Having worked for many years at the Department of City Planning, this is what I learned. First and foremost, community is a verb. You have to create it by interacting with people. You have to form groups with your neighbors, you have to open doors, you have to listen. And then you organize community events on your site. You show your plans and get feedback, and you always have to be available. Now, the model block is not the first, and it will certainly not, I hope, be the last example of community planning in Red Hook. In fact, the model block follows one of the most important efforts in community planning, I think, in Brooklyn, called the Red Hook 197A Community Plan. That plan became policy. It was written by the community almost a generation ago, passed by the community board, and enacted by the city council. Some of the people who wrote it and signed it are here with us today. And the 197A plan said that our community should work to rebuild our population and economy through improvements to its physical and social fabric, specifically to provide industrial activity, employment, new housing, all in a physically integrated community. And here's our community planning timeline for the last 10 years. As we talked about earlier, it starts with the shock of Hurricane Sandy, then forming our Red Hook Rising Committee for Recovery, then the idea of the BASF planning project called the Creator Space, and the ideas that came out of those interviews, including the model block. Then we started planning open houses for our neighbors as Red Hook became resilient Red Hook, and we worked on ideas for planning that included mixed use. In 2018, the model block site became available, and we were able to start making it a reality. That's when I brought in 4 Points, John Gerber of 4 Points Development out of DC. He had a track record of mixed income projects in the Shaw neighborhood of Washington, DC, including Progression Place, which became the headquarters of the United Negro College Fund and Teach for America. But my first project with John was actually at the 7th grade science fair. And since then, we've worked on a lot of projects together, including Penn Station project, and now on mixed use projects in Durham, North Carolina, and here in Brooklyn. The next year, we started getting the concept design together, and we're joined by our neighbor, Ahmed Al-Husseini, whose firm A Superlab did the drawing I showed first. Now we are here in the formal approval process, of which the community board hearing is the first step. Let me show you a tool we created in order to get community input. It's called In Situ. It's a piece of software that allows you to see a development in augmented reality on the site. Together with the digital stewards of the Red Hook Initiative, we did a demo day that let people put on some Magic Leap goggles and see the project in front of their eyes. The comments we heard back on that day helped shape the project. For instance, moving the residential to the middle of the block and stepping it back rather than having it on the west edge of the site where the views were better. Donna Shermesh is now the CEO of In Situ, and she's taking this tool, invented in Red Hook, citywide and national, and maybe even global, because she's been picked as the entrepreneur in residence of Schmidt Futures, of Eric Schmidt of Google. This is just one of the many examples of how we make what we make in Red Hook has the potential to go global. Now let's look at the building right now, piece by piece. Remember, our planning goal is to mix uses and find balance. Our motto informally is one job, one bed. Well, we create space for 337 jobs, and we have a total of 259 bedrooms, so that's close. But to do this, we have to craft the building to keep the residential footprint small enough to accommodate the manufacturing. So this is probably a good place to talk about something that people have mentioned to me a lot, which is height, which we know people in Red Hook care about. We are actually not asking for a height variance. It may be surprising, but the allowable height on our block and in much of Red Hook is over 300 feet high. The yellow is the outline of the permissible height of the building. And that's the case for many blocks in Red Hook. Now, in the past, this was not much of an issue because factories were built on one story typically, so they never needed this height. But now the warehouses that we're seeing go up, like the one Amazon just leased next to IKEA on Columbia Street, go 3 stories tall. However, the next generation of warehouses, called high cubes, are almost fully robotic, and they go up 15 stories. The robots don't care how high they go up. Now, those of you who study zoning will say, how can you go up 15 stories with 2 FAR? The answer is that these warehouses have only one concrete floor, which counts against floor area. The racks themselves and the robots go up the equivalent of 15 stories inside one giant room. So we know height is an issue, and we're working hard to keep the open field. Only a small percentage of our building goes up, and with the same number of stories as the tall building the Red Hook houses. Here's an image of what the residential building looks like from the street. Now, let's talk about jobs. We have this tradition of what we like to call walk-to-work jobs in Red Hook. we need to create the space for those jobs and balance it with housing so that we can keep that kind of adjacency. But what kind of jobs would we be creating? Well, they're from entry-level manager to business owner. They're an ecosystem of jobs. Here's what I mean by that ecosystem. Different jobs, different businesses in Red Hook have different space needs. You know, there are certain manufacturing needs that need 30-foot high space. They need access to trucks and doors opening on the street. There are others that have 3D printing that need good ventilation or a quiet environment or an environment that has good light. You know, all of them have kind of subtle differences in size and scale. And we've gone around our neighborhood to look at what those spaces are and then try to put them into a framework in one building. And the purpose of this framework is what Red Hook can be great about: the ability to take local people, put them into a framework that has global connections, and let them work through the contacts that we all have and the skills that we all have to gain experience and take their careers as far as they can. Now, housing. We create a building that we hope can be housing for the neighborhood. Now, as you know, the way things are set up now in housing law, you can set aside 50% of the affordable units for a lottery for neighbors, and that's defined by CB6. We want to give opportunity to those who grew up here to create their own households while staying near their parents, to grow their families, to live where they work. And the question I get all the time, of course, is what is the affordability? Well, here are the statistics. The building has 59 market studios and 26 affordable studios. And by the way, all these are in the submission materials. So, you know, if you don't get the numbers on the first pass, they're all there. Of those studios, 20 are affordable at 130% AMI, 2 at 60, and 4 at 40. There are 51 market one bedrooms and 20 affordable one bedrooms, of which 12 are at 130, 4 at 60, and 4 at 40. There are 24 two bedrooms at market and 12 affordable two bedrooms, of which 7 are at 130, 3 at 60, 2 at 40. And then there are 7 or 8 market rate 3 bedrooms, 3 affordable 3 bedrooms, 2 of which are at 130 and 1 at 60. And these numbers are all really hard to digest, but a good way of looking at it is from the point of view of a potential renter. So, for example, at the 130 AMI level, I have friends here where the mom is a school teacher, the dad is a carpenter, they have 2 kids, and they're thinking of another. A 3-bedroom for them would cost $37.28 a month, according to the HPD rules. Here's another example, this time for 60 AMI. A single working mom with 2 kids, one of whom has just started to work part-time, could fall into the 60% AMI category, and they would pay $1,366 for a 2-bedroom. And now let's look at the 40 AMI category. Someone who has their first job and wants to move out from their parents but stay in the neighborhood. They could get a studio for $567 a month. The goal is to give people options, to have something new and of really good quality but affordable rent. Right now, you have very few options for affordability in Red Hook if you want to look beyond NYCHA but stay in the neighborhood. Now let's talk a little bit about resilience, very, very important category. On the one hand, we have resilience from really extreme events like Hurricane Sandy. And in that regard, our building is a concrete frame building, and it has a courtyard inside way above the flood elevation. So it's able to stand the weather in the tradition of our really heavily built 19th century warehouses. But for less cataclysmic events, but still important and important to be prepared in resilience, things like power outages, like nuisance flooding. Well, we were going to have off-grid energy storage with batteries and emergency power network for the community, as well as to take the Red Hook Initiative Mesh Emergency Communications Network and expand it. Now, finally, we get to environmental cleanup. We have to clean up a very substantial amount of historical pollution on our site. This is a site where the boilers that powered the steam shovels that dug the Panama Canal were built. And our site ends up being the most polluted in our immediate neighborhood. 87% of our site needs decontamination. This might actually be a good time to answer the question that Carlos brought up and that I've been asked many times and that has been often misrepresented, I think, in the press. And that is, why are you going to BSA instead of going through ULURP? So, I've worked at city planning for a long time and know the ULURP process, and went back to my colleagues when it looked like we were able to begin making this project a reality to show them and say, wow, we've got this incredible project. We can make 337 jobs. We're going to create housing. It's in a mixed use block that has had housing and factories on the same site forever. What do we do next? They told me, well, Alex, your project is in an IBZ. And I said, well, that's great. We're doing exactly what the IBZ wants, which is to create many manufacturing jobs. I said, no, but there's a policy to protect the IBZ that won't allow us to consider a ULURP with residential in it. And saying, well, but I'm fulfilling the goals of the IBZ in a way greater than I don't think any other site nearby has done. And they said, it's just a catch-22. Then one of the older people there with more experience said, do you have pollution on your site? And we were beginning to do our investigation. Said, yeah, we have some pollution. He said, well, you should look into your pollution and then see about the BSA. And that's what took us to the BSA and brought up this issue as a potential. And this is where the environmental cleanup plays into it. Because, like you said very correctly at the beginning, the BSA variance requires you to show a unique hardship. You can't even go in the door of BSA unless you can show that uniqueness. And we have a combination of pollution, and to make it even more tricky, a shoreline. Remember I said it was filled in the 19th century? Our block is exactly the line that's half water and half land. And you have stable and unstable soils with an area that needs a large amount of remediation. And as we studied it and figured out the cost of it, we realized that we do have a unique hardship, and then can go into the process of finding whether we satisfy these other requirements. And this is, of course, the first step in that process. We can talk more specifically about each of these findings if need be. But I think at this point, I should turn it over to John Bean, who is our attorney on this, who also used to be the chief counsel of BSA, so is very, very well versed in this. And finally, to complete my part of the presentation, you had asked us earlier to talk about the responsible development process that you advocate, and that we will want to develop responsibly, and also to show to you the qualifications of our team to prove that we can do projects like this and do them in a successful and responsible way. We have a wonderful team that I'm very proud of, that includes groups and people that have national, even international reputations. And we're happy to give you as much background on them as you would like. But just suffice it to say that 4 Points, Architectonica, our architect, AKRF, who's doing the environmental assessment, Strook, who's our legal lead, Capolino with the financial analysis, and then with A Superlab and Marpiero Pollock Architects, have done a wonderful job and are excellent groups in all respect, and I recommend them all to you very, very highly. So with that, thank you again for listening. I'll stop the screen share right now and give it back to John B.
Thank you. And I think, I don't think you meant to, but I think you neglected to mention Langen, and that's exactly who I think we want to hear from, Michael Burke at Langen, because he and his team are the ones that helped us develop our A finding, that or number one in that list, which is that we have a unique physical condition that causes practical difficulty. And I'm glad the council person made a comment about this, because it helps us to explain what it means to have a unique physical condition, and also what the other findings, how they're going to be reviewed by you and by the board. But let's start with the unique physical condition and what it means to be contaminated. And maybe Michael Burke can give us 30 seconds on what they identified and what the costs roughly are based on that remediation that's required.
Yeah, let me turn on my camera. Excuse me for just 1 second. Okay, so I don't think my camera's working. Can you guys see me?
No, we see you.
Yep, we see you.
Okay, great. So hey everyone, my name is Michael Burke. I am a principal at Langen. I run our environmental group in New York City and in the Hudson Valley. I just want to give you a brief overview, and I'll keep it concise. If you guys have questions, I could definitely get a little more deep into it. But this site, as Alex suggested, it is a contaminated site. We enrolled the site in the brownfield cleanup program because of the level of contamination that we've encountered here. The brownfield cleanup program, it's a program that is administered by the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation and the New York State Department of Health. We go through a robust public comment period for all of our plans. So, the work that we're going to be doing, it won't be done in a vacuum. You, the community, will have an opportunity to comment on all of our work plans that we present before the state. The reason that we were eligible for this program is the contamination on the site. So as Alex mentioned, there's a protracted history here of industrial use, which resulted in some pretty significant contamination. The contamination, it's as deep as 80 to 90 feet in areas. There's volatile contamination, which means it could volatilize into the vapor, and it could present a respirable exposure. There is inorganic contamination in the form of polychlorinated biphenyls, or PCBs, as you may know them as, heavy metals, including arsenic and lead. There's petroleum contamination. So there were several old storage tanks. So we have fuel oil, diesel, gasoline contamination, and there's also tar contamination from the old industrial processes where they used to manufacture tar that was used to coat old tanks. So the material was released into the ground, and it's present from the surface, and as I mentioned, as deep as about 90 feet. The media that's contaminated is soil, groundwater, and soil vapor. So the plans that we're going to incorporate that will implement as part of this proposed development will render the property protective to human health and the environment. Again, these aren't plans that we're going to develop in a vacuum. There'll be input from the state, the Department of Health and the Department of Environmental Conservation. And before the plans are finalized, the community will have an opportunity to comment. So there'll be a public notice before they're finalized, and we'll establish a repository in the neighborhood. So you all can review the documents that we're preparing and the plans that we're preparing, and you'll have an opportunity to comment. Those comments will be filtered through the Department of Environmental Conservation, and they'll be reviewed by us, and before they're finalized. So you all will be part of that process.
Thank you, Michael. And I have a couple of just sort of leading questions, if it were, as it were. Is it accurate to say that you are doing the exact same remediation, whether or not you're doing the proposed or the as of right, which would just be the two-story manufacturing building?
Well, no. It's a residential. The proposal here is for a residential development. So the standards that we're going to adhere to for a residential cleanup are much more strict than those that we'd have to adhere to for a commercial or manufacturing use.
But overall, the premium construction costs are identical for both, right?
Correct.
Maybe I should talk to Jeff. Okay, so you're kind of saying yes and no, but I hear that there's a nuance there. Probably there's an engineering component that I don't entirely grasp. And then the second part of this is when you were asked for input from our financial folks, was it it happened before we even had the model block. They needed to know what the contamination was in advance of doing anything, because anytime you develop a site like this, you have to remediate, right?
Yeah, I mean, because of the nature of the contamination, it's a reportable release, and there is an obligation to remediate. So regardless of the plan, the site will need to be remediated.
Okay, and so that's the A finding, and the Langen report. It's hard to distill it into 2 minutes. Michael obviously is a pro, and he's done this. I think he said 111 times in all in areas of the city and outside the city. But I think he did a good job, and I invite people to look through the report. I think it's 40, 50 pages long, not even including the exhibits. So, and more than that if you include the soil analysis. So that's the A finding as we see it, the contamination. The B finding is based on us not being able to make a reasonable return. And that's part of what I was asking Michael about, which is the costs are going to be there either way. And so if the same cost must be incurred, then if you're taking a huge loss before you even start to develop, then that puts you in the realm of being eligible for a variance. And Jack Freeman is here, and he's been doing this at VSA for about 30 years. And I don't think there's a single person who knows more about financial analysis before the Board of Standards and Appeals than Jack Freeman. And I don't know that, I think it's better for him to answer discrete questions rather than try to summarize. We did send you an executive summary, which I think still ran several pages. So I know that the B finding is something that people like to talk about, and we're prepared to talk about it. But I think question and answer is probably better for that. In terms of the C finding, that's neighborhood character. And you're the community board. You have a very important role in determining what neighborhood character is, what you believe it is, what it has been in the past. But there are other indicia that we look to the zoning, which I know it hasn't been changed in 60 years. We have the original zoning on this site. And this site has also always had housing, and there's housing across the street. There's as of right housing across another street. So, and existing non-conforming housing on the site. So as we see it, housing has always been an integral part of this part of Red Hook. And mixed use is really integral as well. We have Christopher from Architectonica, and I wonder if he could just shed a little bit of light on how we try to mass and understand the site from a sort of planning architectural perspective to respond to the nature of the neighborhood, the build character, and the zoning.
Can everyone hear me? John, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. Thank you everyone for your time, council members, and to the public. I'll keep this brief. When the project started, ownership had made it very clear that input from the community was absolutely necessary in order to establish a quote unquote contextual design. Whether or not a project fits into a neighborhood characteristic is somewhat subjective. There's no cut and dry language as to what defines character and whether or not that would fit into a particular site. But since the start of the project, we were very much interested in integrating with the surrounding community, immediate as well as Red Hook proper, and taking cues from the existing built structures and integrating that into the project itself. So we are very heavily influenced by materiality, proportions of windows, but more importantly, really what the streetscape and street wall would look like. Red Hook is a very, very unique community, very heavily pedestrian oriented, with a lot of fantastic street environments that everyone can experience. So continuing that language that already exists within Red Hook was very important to implement into the design. The majority of the project on the site is about 80,000 square feet, the site proper itself. And along the perimeter of I'd say 3/4, 7/8 of the site, there's about 20,000 square foot of existing properties on the southeast corner. It was a heavily influenced on what the streetscape could be, what that pedestrian experience could be, and bring all those little things that really would identify Red Hook into the new project. Now, we were not trying to recreate a phony sense of historicism, but we were trying to acknowledge the contextual characteristics of the community and interpret those in such a way where it would represent the model block here. Majority of the ground floors and a couple floors above, very low rise to mid rise, 60 feet. And then we set back, in particular on the east side, and then on Conover Street, and then the west side on Ferris Street. And those are the areas where we have congregated the commercial, the maker space, the courtyard above, and then some additional commercial and worker makerspace programs. And when we had to incorporate the residential program, it was very important for us to explore where that volume could be located. When you, not often do you have a site that is nearly an entire city block, but when you do, you really have to consider the impact that a larger volume would have. And I say the term larger, meaning in height, which has been discussed thus far tonight. So we explored some ideas. Would the residential volume be better on a corner, perhaps on Conover and Wolcott? Or would it be better located prioritizing views on Ferris and Wolcott? So that went antithetical to what we believed really the spirit of the project was, which it was jobs, which was makerspace, which was commercial space, and that the residential part of the project should really serve as a backdrop to the entire development. So we had explored locations of towers, and it came to be that locating the residential volume in the center of the block would further enhance the pedestrian experience and the streetscape that is very important to this proposal. Putting that on a corner, a taller volume on a corner where you would have an entire volume of wall coming down would create a canyon effect, whether that is on the east side or the west side. It would feel like an imposing gesture that is antithetical to what is built in Red Hook to date. So by locating the residential volume in the middle of the site helps alleviate creating those big walls coming down. Now, I will say that the residential portion, if you measure the floor plates from the ground floor, occupies about 16% of the site, where 84% of the site is prioritized with manufacturing, with commercial, with restaurants. The things that really make a neighborhood with active space have been prioritized with the location of that residential building. But then once we get above that 60-foot street wall where we have to step back and recognize the sky exposure plane, that footprint of the residential is further reduced to about 13% of the entire site, so even smaller. And then there's some other things that we needed to consider. Well, what's the actual shape of the volume look like in floor plan? And with, speaking with ownership, that proposing a slab tower, meaning that you have a corridor in the middle, units on the left and units on the right, would be a very appropriate slender option, meaning it's minimizing the impact on how much volume visually the tower takes up. We could have looked at doing a point tower, but point tower tends to be wider and not very contextual whatsoever. So a slab building having a thin floor plates helps further reduce the idea of this giant large volume or large gesture. I will say, and then conclude, this will be my last statement, how the residential volume actually sits on top of the podium was also important. We could have followed the sky exposure plane line and just set back and set back and set back and see a wedding cake shape, which is, you know, very much all around the city due to that older zoning that John had alluded to previously. But we didn't want to, we wanted to break it up further. We wanted to reduce the visual scale of everything. So we had ganged floors together, 2 floors, 3 floors, and started shifting those. And those shifts were really kind of driven contextually by the Red Hook shipping terminal and, you know, stacking shipping containers. But shifting that back and forth, it creates more open space in front of the sky exposure plane. And it creates a lighter sense where this building with the residential volume integrates with the tower and actually helps reduce the visual scale of the entire building. And that allows it to serve as a backdrop to the prioritized low-rise and prioritized streetscape of the development.
That was really helpful. Thank you. So
let's finish with your presentation yet. I'd like to move on to questions as soon as possible.
I mean, we were happy to, I was going to just speak briefly to the self-created hardship issue. And then the minimum variance is, as you noted, wrapped up in the B finding. So I'm sure the questions on minimum variance will come out when you ask about financial.
You're going to get so many questions, so don't worry about that.
Well, we are ready to answer them, but
Good.
Self-created hardship, let's just talk that briefly because I think it's important. I think your honorable colleague noted that just acquiring a site that has a hardship is not itself self-created hardship, but a bit more on the point of contamination. The board has a long history of recognizing contamination as not self-created, but it has to have been carried out in accordance with the standards of the time. And since we're talking about contamination from the 1880s, I think we can be confident and beyond, but a lot of the worst contamination happened well before any standards were in place for responsible disposal of these materials. So we feel very confident that we can get over the D finding in terms of self-created hardship. And I think the board's had a few recent cases in the 2000s where that was that had to be proven, but you know, it's well established at the board. So without trying to put anyone else to sleep now, let's talk about questions. We're here. I know you have a lot of them, what
Good.
I think we'll do is I'll receive the question. If I can answer it, I'll answer
what
it.
I think you'll do is respond to the questions that we ask you, and you do not control the program from this point on. Thank you.
I'm just saying, I'm going to offer that I will ask the consultant if I don't know the answer. That's all I'm saying.
Of course,
I'm not trying to control
that's
anything.
fine. Listen, you guys, I see that you have seriously considered everything about this site. You are established professionals who are really knowledgeable about what you want to do. And I appreciate that fact. I also appreciate the fact that you have tried to get the community to understand what the nature of a BSA application is. That being said, we have a lot of people who want to ask questions. I'm going to ask those people to try to be brief with their questions or their comments. Try to limit them to a couple of minutes, please. Try not to repeat any questions if you can. Absolutely be civil and courteous to everybody. And we're gonna, as soon as I'm finished asking my question, then we're gonna move on to the general questions. First of all, I wanna say that I didn't know about this project until it came to us, and that part of the community outreach is sort of an issue to me. But the second thing I wanna know is if you, you guys are trying to build something that is unique to Red Hook. It's not like you're going to be building a 14-story building that is filled with robots that are going to go up and down. It is going to be a multi-purpose building if you get your variance, and it is, I think, essentially different from what we've seen in the neighborhood. And I think my own personal view is that this would have been appropriate if we were considering a zoning change for the area of Red Hook that integrated the kind of concepts that you guys are interested in, that I think are fascinating myself, but I don't particularly care for them as a variance, particularly since some of the things that you're talking about, I don't even know how we could enforce. I'm not saying you're acting in bad faith. I think you're probably acting in very good faith, but I don't know how we can enforce many of the things that were said at the beginning of the presentation. So now I'm going to throw it out to the community. And first up is going to be Paul Basile from the Gowanus Alliance.
Thank you, Mark. Let me just pull up my notes here quickly. Thank you, everyone, for allowing me to ask this question. So I'll start with a question and it'll become a comment. And if Mark or David or anyone else can answer the question, that would be appreciated. And first, I want to thank the councilman for better articulating concerns that are shared by members of the community whose voices are only heard if a fair public process is available to them. So the question is a project like this subject to a traffic study? If not, why not? And shouldn't we as a board expect that a BSA application be required to prove its impact on the surrounding blocks and businesses? As a community, we are currently asking DOT to conduct a traffic study in Red Hook related to the as-of-right uses, such as last mile distribution facilities, which, not unlike self-storage facilities, in my opinion, do not represent the best uses of manufacturing zoned areas. These uses, as far as I'm concerned, represent the worst of consumerism, and the need for their existence is due to the behavior of new residential development and not necessarily the current community or IBZ businesses. Therefore, it is my opinion that the need for last mile warehouses and self-storage facilities are directly tied to, and perhaps because of over residential development and poor planning. Therefore, we should consider how projects like this one before us should mitigate the need for more self-storage or last mile delivery facilities in our community's future. I also believe that we as a board should be asking the city to do a study on how mixed use and residential projects such as this one before us be required to present a study on how they will, for certain, and I say for certain because it's already happened in other areas, how such a project will impact its manufacturing neighbors. If we as a board value the IBZ and understand its purpose, we, as I see it, to be a designated as area for manufacturing and industrial uses, usually those uses that do not integrate well with residential areas, it would then seem to me counterproductive to introduce more of what is not allowed in the IBZ, which in the past have set precedent and further compounded pressures and created quality of life conflicts between new residents and those remaining IBZ businesses. It is my experience that those complaints historically force businesses to relocate rather than deal with 311 complaints, even if those complaints are found not to be violations of M zone use regulations. As a community, we should also find ways to make cleanup possible and affordable by giving manufacturing developers relief for such projects. Lastly, I read an article which a person associated with this project, it may have been the former city planner who I believe is a partner. This gentleman made a very disheartening statement where it seemed he made a veiled attempt to demonize as-of-right uses, something to the effect that nobody wants to see another last mile warehouse here. I find that very disturbing threat to all as-of-right users in the IBZ that do not fit a group's priorities, pitting our neighbors against each other for no other reason but self-serving attempt to find favor with those who have anti-industrial sentiments. We already have enough pressure to deal with as the Gowanus rezoning approaches, and people's behaviors require more infrastructure changes to accommodate new residential uses and demands, rather than the needs of industrial users, and ultimately make it harder to preserve or grow M-type uses in the IBZ. If we see merit in a project like this, we must then also do more than just promise IBZ improvements or further restrict uses in the IBZ. We must advocate for growth in the IBZ for those allowed to operate in and for as-of-right IBZ uses. For an example, with a virtual land bank that will allow the city to offer more FAR to manufacturing users in the IBZ equal to the amount of area that was rezoned or provided a variance for other uses in that IBZ, for which the city or community find merit for. So while this application seeks to avoid a ticking clock of the ULIP action, I can tell you that if this project is approved, to me, it further represents the bell that tolls for M-zone users. Thank you for allowing me to participate and ask this question and comment. Red Hook is and was always a model community, in my opinion. I wish to submit my comments in writing for the full community board to have access to. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Paul. And Paul, please be aware, listen, it was not a question really. Please be aware, Paul, that if you want to submit comments directly to the Board of Standards and Appeals, you can do that. You can attend their hearings as well as what we do here. Now I'm going to throw it to Ty and let Ty go through the questions and provide.
Mark, don't you want to stay within the committee at this moment?
You know,
Yeah.
I would like to go from the committee to a non-committee to the committee to non-committee, because at some point we're going to have a motion and then it's going to all be committee. And then people who are attending, I would like to have an opportunity to participate.
Okay, so Mark, this is Dave. We have about 20 people who, Ty, is that the current list? 20 people have asked to speak?
Yeah, I have 21 on the list. Yeah.
Yeah, so just so you're aware of that, Mark. And so for those of you who are going to ask, please, brevity would be appreciated.
Amen.
Mark, when you get a chance, put me on your list for your questions, please.
You can
Jerry,
raise
you
your
can
hand,
be-
Jerry.
I did.
I don't see it.
You're on Ty's list. You're now on Ty's list.
Let's hear the community.
Okay, so we're gonna go to some community members who have signed up using the link. Thank you very much for doing that. In the meantime, if you're on the committee, we would appreciate if you raise your hand if you have a comment, and that's how I'll know that you have a comment or a question when the time comes. So there's going to be a bit of a tag here after I read the name. The first name on the list is Anthony. Anthony, at this time, I'm going to find you on the attendee list to upgrade you to a panelist.
Anthony Bradfield.
Yeah. You should be able to unmute yourself, and please keep yourself to about 2 minutes if you can.
Anthony, you're still muted.
Yeah, thank you. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you for taking my question. I was really, I was moved by, well, let me see if I get my camera too. Yeah, I was, I was listening to what Carlos Menchaca said, and he said that the developers had these great aspirations for the neighborhood, and looking for input, but they didn't go with the youth process, and I wanted to ask why they chose not.
You have COVID now?
Okay, thank you, Anthony. Anybody who's not speaking, could you put yourselves on mute? We tend to pick up a lot of background. So if someone wants to answer Anthony's question.
Sure. So, I mean, Alex, I think did a fairly strong answer to this, but I'll try to build on what he said. And our position is that the city has a policy that we are trying not to disturb. The policy is in an IBZ, even in an ombudsman zone, which actually is a designation that reflects a mixed use character, not just industrial, but even in an ombudsman IBZ, the city isn't, they're not going to change the map because they're going to do that on a much larger scale. And that's EDC, and the zoning, the planning department isn't going to support it because that's been declared the city policy. The mayor is leaving in 9 months, but that's it, you don't have any movement in that regard. And so even aside from that, our position is that we, because of this unique physical condition and the hardships and the amount of loss that we take before we do anything on the site, BSA is really our only route. There's no certainty at any in any direction, and there's no certainty in city planning through the ULURP. There's no certainty at BSA, but we feel that BSA makes sense given the uniqueness of this site, and so there's a mechanism in place for a site like ours, and we're fully within our right to take that option. And I have to say, we are in community comment period now. We are hearing you. You are free to go to the BSA and give them your opinion. The councilman is here to voice his concerns and ask his questions. We're not skipping any public process. We're in the public process. BSA takes very seriously what the community board has to say. I should know. And so I don't, I think that the team isn't just paying lip service to the notion of community involvement. I mean, we've already done dozens of presentations for people who are interested, and we'll continue to do them because we think we have a strong project. Alex is a committed member of the neighborhood, and he wants to do something that he thinks will improve it for everyone, not just enrich some developer. So that's a long answer, but the short answer is we think that this is the appropriate route.
All right, thank you. Please, brevity would be appreciated. Mark,
okay.
do you want to go to community or board or committee? Well, Mark, can you hear me? All right, I think Mark's on mute. So, well, Ty, you want to
Mark is
call the next person?
Yeah, Scott Baker is next on the list, but I think he left a comment and left. So Scott, if you're still in the chat, or if you're still here, leave a message in the chat. We'll get you next. But Gabriella Manduca, I'm going to promote you to panelist.
After this, we'll come back to the committee, if that's okay with Mark.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for the panel. Can you hear me? Okay, and special thanks to Mr. Washburn for speaking with us. I'm a very nearby resident, and I'm going to speak very briefly in opposition to the subject proposal in what are hopefully rather accessible terms. My grounds for opposition are process, a simple restatement of the self-imposition prong and of the difference between a substantial hardship and a self-created hardship. And I'll also mention the substantial character prong. Property owners are entitled to reasonable economic returns on their investments. They're entitled to realizing the benefits of their investments, and usually that means a rezoning request made in appropriate circumstances. In this case, we're before the BSA, and I appreciate Mr. Menchaca's comments on process and won't speak on his points any further. But what property owners are not permitted to do is shop zones, irrespective of the forum. The hardship claimed here is that 1.5 centuries of industrial use has greatly polluted the subject lot, causing a really high cost to remediate, and so a high cost to realize those investments. But 1.5 centuries is a long time. It's Red Hook's history. And this is an IBZ, an industrial zone that's seen plenty of pollution in its time. Any purchaser of land who did even minimal diligence would know that. And it's unreasonable that the claimed hardship be grounds for this basically backdoor variance. The continuity of the character of the neighborhood should not have to falter and disintegrate due to a land purchaser's negligence at best and planned way around the zoning law at worst. The situation is not, as it was called, a catch-22. Secondly, and even more briefly, the project does not meet the prong requiring that projects do not disturb the essential character of the zone. It's been compared to the NYCHA housing as a comparison of visual scale, which is an unrealistic comparison given just the visual distance between the proposed project and the Red Hook houses, which honestly are really deserving our attention separately. We heard also from Mr. Short that big walls coming down would be, quote, antithetical to the character of Red Hook. He's mentioning it in the context of, oh, if it's on a corner, but I think even all of us must understand that tall buildings anywhere on that block, whether it's on the corner of the block or in the center as proposed, are in fact, in his words, antithetical to the character of the neighborhood. In short, you have 5 prongs that are required and you don't have them. This proposal doesn't meet the procedural prongs it needs to overcome to succeed, and the BSA process by its plain terms has to block it on grounds as mentioned. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gabriella. Mark, do you want me to call on panelists? You can nod or put your thumbs up or unmute, or I'm going to go for it.
You have complete discretion, David. You know that.
Oh, thank you. So I'm just going to go left to right on my screen. So Daniel, you want to go ahead? And remember, after you speak, everybody, if you had your hand up, just put it back down.
I'm happy to go ahead, but I think others had their hands up for me, but maybe I should just go.
Sorry.
Yeah. So I was just struck. I was reviewing the economic analysis, and I was struck by the feasibility analysis in terms of the comparison between the as of right and the proposed development, and then the fact that both are projected to be essentially in the hole, to have development costs that exceed their capitalized net value. And it struck me as raising two questions. First of all, I mean, this project is being sold to a certain degree on avoiding the alternative of the as of right development of a last mile warehouse. And if that as of right development is projected at this point to be not to be profitable, how seriously should we be taking that threat of that's what we're going to wind up with on this site? And then second of all, in terms of the proposed development, I guess I have to ask a question in terms of, and I think this goes to the reasonable return prong, how you propose to go forward with a project and get financing for a project that's projected to have, a negative value, in terms of the, even taking into account the value of the tax benefits. So, can we really count on, if we say yes to this, can we really count on this actually being completed? I mean, the last thing the worst outcome here would be a project that started and then wasn't completed because financing ran out or other factors overtook it. So those are my questions.
Well, I think that's a really
Thank you, Daniel.
good question, and we appreciate that you're reading through the financial report in detail. Jack, we've talked about this over the years in various cases, both when I was on the other side of the panel and then now that we're on this side together. You always say that a feasible project is one that pays more or less for the cost of its construction. But can you explain that a little more, although I know you're supposed to be brief, what that means in terms of the BSA's precedents and why, even if a project is a little bit less valuable than its cost or a little bit more than the board has recognized, that is a reasonable return?
Sure. The Board of Standards and Appeals is a peculiar place when it comes to doing financial analysis. It's somewhat like going down the rabbit hole in Alice in Wonderland. They have their own set of rules and they look at things in a very particular way. All of the findings, although they were mentioned individually, are interrelated, so that the first finding, which is the unique conditions, that has to be quantified for the board. And
Jack, your voice is dropping and it's hard for some of us to hear you.
I'm sorry, I'm not sure how I can improve that. I'll see if I can change it on my computer.
There's also a hum in the background, a buzzing.
Can you hear me better now?
No. It was all right in the beginning and then it just dropped.
I have no idea why that is. One thing I found in the past is I can just dial in or move back away. Can you hear me better now?
Not really.
Not really.
I mean, who is everybody having the same problem? I mean, Jack's sort of soft spoken, but I can certainly hear him myself. Maybe you can turn your volume up a little bit, not to tell you what to do.
Well, I can hear you, no problem, John. And anybody
Well,
else?
That's because I'm
why doesn't he just do his best and
yeah, let's just project a little more.
Just try to project, Jack.
Okay. Is that better? I can speak a little bit louder. What I was saying is that all the findings are interrelated. So the board's very particular about establishing that there is a unique condition and that unique condition can be quantified. So in the case of this project, and it's shown in the materials, the cost of the uniqueness is about $11.5 million. So that is the basis for the feasibility analysis. Without $11.5 million worth of premium costs, the as of right would be a feasible project. And that's the test that we try to establish for a Board of Standards and Appeals analysis. So if we did not have $11.5 million worth of unique costs, we would have a feasible project in the as-of-right case. And I believe that if you take a look and see what the bottom line in our schedule is, it's about $11.5 million. So if we remove that premium cost, we would have a feasible project. And feasibility is where the value of the project from all of its potential income is less the costs of development are zero. Jerry, are you speaking? I couldn't hear you.
Can I, maybe I can, and I think this is a good time to jump in and just say from a theoretical perspective, the variance really isn't supposed to advantage anybody. It's supposed to bring you up to speed. Basically, it equalizes you with your neighbors. It helps, whatever the impact of the zoning is, when it's mixed with your hardship, you're supposed to eliminate that. So if we were to come in and say, we're going to make 20 million with our project, the board is going to say, well, that's not the minimum variance, because you haven't just paid for your project, you paid for your project plus 20 million. And so any project that's much more than it's paying for itself is going to have to be cut back in the board's analysis of it. Is that right, Jack?
Yeah. Now, there is a loss showing in the proposed, but the loss is showing because of the way the board wants you to characterize the availability of tax credits that can be applied to offset that loss. And there's a program called the Brownfields Tax Credit Program, which provides credits against the state income tax, which were we to plug that in, that would basically be worth about $4.1 million, which is what the deficit is in the proposed.
So you break even basically if you take
Well, it's not break even because the value of the project is not break even. The value of the project incorporates consideration of reasonable return in determination of what's called the cap rate. So you're not breaking even. What you're doing is you're coming up with a project that pays for its costs and provides the developer of that project with a return on his capital investment and a return of that capital. So that's established within what's called the capitalization rate.
Great, thanks, that's all.
Okay.
All right, thank you, Jack.
Right, I just want to jump one step further because these things are all related. The board,
please be brief.
Sure, the board, as John mentioned, will not provide you with any excess profit or windfall. So that gets to the fifth finding, which is the minimum variance finding, and that's what we struggle to achieve in analyzing the project, is to come up with a potential value that pays for those costs, but does not provide more than paying for those costs. It's an arithmetic problem, and that is the relationship between the A finding, the B finding, and the E finding. That's it.
Okay, thank you. Joanna?
Hi, all. Joanna.
I'm sorry, Joanna. Jack, can you mute yourself? I think that's where the humming's coming from.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you for the thorough presentation, but I am concerned that what we're doing here is addressing a much larger issue in a piecemeal fashion, and that larger issue is a real abdication on the part of city planning and DOT and all the other city agencies that should step in and do a proper assessment of this whole area instead of having, individual developers and community boards assess lots one by one. So I just wanted to say that, first of all, I'm concerned about the process as well. And something I would definitely want to know more about, were this going through ULURP, is the impact of people coming and going to this project on the neighborhood. I saw in the Capolino report that if it were as right, there would be 160 parking spots allotted. Due to the expansion that is being requested, it'll be over 300 spots required by city planning. if this project is intended to be designed as a place where people can work and live in the same location, it really makes no sense. So just really want more, meat and bones of how people are going to be interacting with this project in the neighborhood, and don't see that by going through the BSA, the community is going to get that. Thank you.
So Joanna, is there a very specific question there that maybe?
Yeah, I would just reduce it to parking minimums and what can be done to encourage active transit to the building.
Okay.
It just doesn't make any sense how it's currently presented to have over 300 parking spots for something that's intended for local use.
Okay.
So, do you want me to try to answer that? I know people want us to be brief, but sometimes in order to explain something, you have to take a bit of time. I'm very mindful of the comments in the chat, and people have what they want to say, and we want to hear them. The zoning requires that number of parking spaces. We would love to ask for a waiver, but we've already reached the amount of waiver we think is appropriate under these circumstances. We do have an environmental assessment statement. It's not short, it's 145 pages, and it hasn't been accepted yet by the board. They're still reviewing it, DOT is reviewing it. But I could have our engineer speak a little bit to how we did not identify an impact based on what we expect. We don't actually expect to necessarily use those 300 spaces. We think that it'll be underutilized, but that's what the zoning requires right now. I think a lot of people would like to see parking be reduced the way it was in Manhattan, but that's just not the reality that we're facing with the zoning saying what it says. So I can have the engineer speak from AKRF and talk about traffic, or you can know that we are actually required to do an assessment of it, and we're doing it.
I think that's, if we could just pause on that, because I'm looking at the list here and several people signed up to ask questions before the meeting started. I'd like to get to them before coming back to the committee. So why don't we go to I think Spencer Heck, is it Heck Wolf? Is next. Spencer, are you here?
Yeah, I just
All right.
upgraded him.
Okay.
Spencer, you can unmute yourself anytime.
There he is.
Hi.
Okay.
Hi, I was actually just about to ask the same question about the parking requirements and what can be done with that. And also just get A to Z timeline on the project. When would construction start and when would project completion? What date would be project completion?
Okay, so thank you, Spencer. So why don't we answer the timeline? And again, we'll come back to the parking thing, John, if you could.
Okay. So, well, commencement is difficult because the BSA hearing process could go on for quite some time. If they have multiple hearings, then we might not have a decision then, this time next year. Ideally, we will persuade them faster than that. I don't, what's our, Aaron, do we have a build year that we're studying in, and when we do, but I don't know it offhand.
I believe it's 2023, 2024. Let me just verify that. Hang on.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to just look it up and then jump in later so we can keep the questions going. But maybe you can also explain what build year means and just for the group to understand what we're studying. And we study what's the worst case. We might do better than this. We might build faster than this. We might get through BSA faster than this, but we have to do a reasonable assessment of when we think we'll build in order to evaluate the impacts or potential impacts on the community.
Hi, everybody. I'm Aaron Werner. I'm with AKRF for the environmental planning firm that's handling the city environmental quality review for the project. Yeah, so the build year for seeker purposes is when the project is expected to be built and functioning. So we've assumed in the EAS, which I believe is available on the board's website, is 2024. We've also assumed, based on the schedule that the team has put forth, that it would be constructed under the 24-month period that seeker requires for further construction assessment. So it's a less than 24-month construction period with a build year of 2024. Correct.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
And I just want to add, I would like to see the development have some sort of bike parking, preferably protective bike parking. It's a very bike accessible neighborhood. I think that should be integrated.
Yeah, thank you, Spencer.
Mhm.
Well, Ben Margolis, South Brooklyn Industrial Development Corporation.
All right, Ben, I just upgraded you to the panel. You can unmute yourself anytime.
Good evening. I'm Ben Margolis, Executive Director of SBIDC, a 4-decade-old nonprofit supporting industrial businesses and workers in the Southwest Brooklyn IBZ. Thanks to the committee for what seems like our only opportunity to express deep concerns. First, regarding impact on the character of the district, 160,000 square feet of residential use directly conflicts with the city's policy objectives for IBZs. It's a total precedent-setting shift. It would affect existing businesses throughout the Red Hook portion of the IBZ, and it would set precedent for all city IBZs and the 40,000 businesses that survive there. Moreover, this application and process really deprives us of a true opportunity to determine a unique hardship and impact, which does not exist here. So I'd really like the committee to consider multiple industrial commercial projects that show a huge range of credible, lucrative, non-residential uses that are available to this site and that these developers did not even consider, and show why their costs are not unique. Let me name just a few. This committee just recently approved a ULURP application for new construction within the IBZ next to a Superfund site. Monadnock Construction is to spend nearly $10 million just on a required esplanade and bulkhead, and then millions more on unique site readiness costs. They're not proposing residential in 14 stories, and they're engaging directly with the council member and advocates on codifying their promises. So to say Wolcott Street has unique costs within an IBZ that forces them to this proposal only is kind of ludicrous. Why is being a brownfield a unique hardship? Not really getting that. DCP has set up a tool for sites like Wolcott Street, ones that have greater commercial market potential than other M-designated properties. I really encourage the committee to look at the industrial business incentive area decisions by the City Planning Commission for other models. In Red Hook, you have a longtime property owner who at great effort is writing a ULURP application for an industrial commercial mix in an M zone at comparable square footage with no residential. And SBIDC, through our own Red Hook Brownfield Opportunity or BOA study, which looks at brownfields and remediation costs throughout the entire Red Hook IBZ, is modeling a profitable industrial commercial development just down the street and on a comparable lot. So looking at these other projects, even using the BSA standards, I invite the committee to consider how out of line this application is. Do you really believe this proposal is the minimum variance necessary to afford relief? Through our own BOA work, we certainly don't think the remediation cost assumptions are accurate or unique, and certainly don't merit 160,000 square feet of residential. So SBIDC stance is that this is perhaps the primest example of self-induced hardship and sets a very, very dangerous precedent. As far as I'm aware, this would go way above and beyond any such industrial variance application in a long, long time. But the real shame here is that if the developer team had worked with the community and through a community process, there are multiple tools available to create a more appropriate project. So I super appreciate the time and just the ability to have this dialogue. But I think, you know, our concerns are many, and hopefully they're clear. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ben. Dana Chermesh-Reshev. Apologies if I'm not pronouncing that correctly.
Dana, you should be able to unmute yourself now.
Yep. Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hey, everybody.
Welcome.
Thank you, everyone, for your time and for letting me speak. I'm a resident of CB6, and I'm the CEO of In Situ. In Situ is an augmented reality platform to engage communities into city planning processes. And we started in situ with this model block project in 2019. We worked with the community, with RHI, with the digital stewards, young people, to showcase different scenarios of the planning. And I hear all this conversation and why Europe, why not Europe, and the concern of, oh, Europe will encourage the community engagement or will allow the community engagement is almost irrelevant in this specific project, because the community was part of this project, the true part of this project from the very first beginning. And when we're talking about, and people here in the chat and in this conversation talked about the waterfront, and will this 14 stories tower of residential will be a problem for the waterfront view, we are not considering what's in there right now. And right now there is nothing there and no one enjoys this view. And the default will be another warehouse. And I think we need to consider the no action and what will happen without developing and without giving a new innovative idea for this site. I think when we came to the community and considered and viewing augmented reality, letting them for several days walking down the street and see the different scenarios, and we saw that the original place we put the residential, which was on Ferry Street, was not the best, and the community wanted to set back and bring it in the middle. I don't think, I didn't say, but I'm an architect and urban planner in my background before I became an entrepreneur. I don't think that will affect the neighborhood character. I think what will keep the neighborhood character is letting people from the neighborhood and other artists and makers to live and work and create in Red Hook. And this project allows that. Moreover, in terms of this model block, it could become a model for me too, as the person who developed this highly participatory and highly transparent community planning tool, because now, as Alex said before, In Situ is a part of Eric Schmidt Incubator, and now our next pilot is with Community Board 5 in Manhattan, in Midtown, and I'm excited to see this example or first case study in Red Hook become a real model to how community planning should look like. And I don't think that being a part of Europe or not part of Europe will take this from this project. I'll stop here and thank you all for letting
Thank you, Dana.
Thank you.
Carly, the last name might be Beccarici or Carici, not sure. And Dana, if you could put your hand down, thank you.
I think that's Carly Baker Rice, who I just tried to promote. Carly, you should be able to unmute yourself here in a moment.
Okay.
Good evening. Thank you for taking my comments. I appreciate it. I would like to just briefly touch on a point of process. In my reading, I've understood the role of your board to provide relief to small parcels caught up in zones established long ago as large swaths. The zone for which this relief has been requested is not large. The current owner was not unwittingly or presumably potentially unfairly or unconstitutionally caught up in zoning established after their ownership began. The owner purchased the property after the zoning was established, knowing full well what the zoning was. That's kind of regardless of the pollution. It seems that the design was created assuming or presuming that zoning would be granted. It was purchased in 2019. My main comments, though, and questions are around affordability, which I'm concerned about in the neighborhood. What are the AMIs based on? Are they neighborhood AMIs or citywide incomes? Over the timeline for the development, citywide AMIs are likely to rise, but that might not be the case for Red Hook. What will the developer be willing to do to make sure that price points are not raised even higher by the end of the development if the project is one day built and city AMIs are at that higher point? Some nonprofit developers are foregoing developer fees in order to ensure affordability in the neighborhoods they seek to serve when that happens. For how many years would the affordable units remain affordable? What are the comparable unit rates based on? There's currently downward pressure on rents in Red Hook, and even looking historically, all but 20 units of the project have rents that are higher than rents in the neighborhood. 67% of the affordable units are more expensive than other places in the neighborhood, and obviously all of the market rate ones are. I'm also curious about the size and rents for the artist, office, maker, and restaurant spaces. Are they in line or out of line with the current abundance of open spaces in Red Hook? Has the developer considered other lots? Why can't these needs be met within current zoning spaces, if perhaps with less profit? Just speaking a little bit further on affordability, this is what gentrification looks like. Flooding this neighborhood with so many expensive units will decrease affordability across the neighborhood. People are already saying every day, and if you go into the stores and talk to business owners, they hear it every day. It's getting more and more expensive to live here. Those are the people who will be pushed out. Affordability will drop across the neighborhood if this, and certainly the projects that would be encouraged by its passing, would continue. And I also want to hear and speak to the value of making sure that NYCHA residents have space to live here in Red Hook. I have thought about that exact same need since I moved to the neighborhood. But somehow in my brainstorming about how we could make that possible, I didn't envision a model block like this. I think there's a lot of other creative solutions that we could come together as a community to develop that wouldn't require this sort of action. So again, most of my questions are around affordability. I know that was a lot of questions, but my biggest concern is around that the way that MIH is being misused right now. It was intended for neighborhoods that are affluent, transit rich, and in need of integration. But when buildings like this are built with a sizable proportion of the affordable apartments being for moderate and middle income, it ends up causing gentrification in the neighborhood and pushing up rates around. So I think that the overall impact of a building like this is going to create gentrification and decrease affordability and increase rent burden in the neighborhood.
Carly, can we let them answer the questions, please? Okay, you're good. So just AMI is not neighborhood or city based. I can let these guys speak to that more. Guys, that was a lot of questions packed in there. If you could please be brief in your answers. I think they were valuable questions.
They were very valuable questions, a very thoughtful discussion point. I think if I don't hit them all, then you can ask them again, I suppose, and I may need to ask some of the team members. AMIs, I believe, are always based on the area. They're not necessarily on Red Hook or a particular neighborhood. So we roughly follow what is called the workforce option of MIH. I think the questioner knows that MIH is not required here because it's not a ULURP, but we think it's appropriate to try to provide some affordable housing. That's why we're following it. I believe the tax benefit is 30 years, and therefore the affordability is 30 years as well. But Jack, am I right on that, or is it 20?
35.
35. Okay, better than 30. Some of the other, I think, were more comments, I think we'd like to provide more affordable here, but when you're doing a financial analysis, you have market to offset the affordable, and you have market apartments to offset the lower value spaces in the commercial and the manufacturing. And so I think that providing more affordable apartments or deeper affordability levels would likely result in an analysis from Jack that requires more floor area. So, and more construction. So that's the balance that we're trying to strike here. But I hear that there's sincere concerns there, and I expect the board will have some similar questions as well, and we'll just keep working on trying to respond. Did I respond to the district questions?
Well, I think there was a question about the affordability of the art spaces and perhaps the manufacturing.
The commercial space.
Yeah.
I think we're modeling that. I don't know the per square foot rents, but I think Jack takes area rents to establish what we'll be able to get. I don't think we're trying to get a premium, because the board would say you've overvalued your eating and drinking establishment. It's not going to be $45 a square foot. All the area ones are $32 per square foot. That's an example. I don't know what the actual is, but the board's very discerning when it comes to things like rents, and we're trying to be in line with the neighborhood as it is today, because that's what the board requires. And honestly, if we're being honest with ourselves as developers, we can't expect to make more than what the area is people in the area are willing to pay for manufacturing, commercial, eating and drinking, maker spaces, artists, and so forth. So I think we have to credibly reflect what's there now in order for the board to accept it.
Thank you. I'm going to go back to our committee now. Glenn Kelly.
Thank you, David. I would like some detail on the cleanup plans which you've based your financial analysis on. Specifically, let me describe how you're going to do this, how deep you're going to excavate, how you're going to isolate the volatile compounds, what effect that isolation, what driving piles, which I assume you're going to do, is going to affect the isolation, and speak to the brownfield grant amount. I heard $4 million given back against your $11.5 million cleanup costs. Just want to confirm that.
Thank you, Glenn.
So let's have Jack talk, speak, or no, I'm sorry, not Jack, Michael Burke. If he could speak to the methodologies, and then maybe Jack can fill in some of the numbers on what we're expecting it to cost.
Yeah, so Glenn, we're the plans haven't been finalized. We're looking at them conceptually now, and recall during Alex's presentation, the hardship is not just chemical with the chemical constituents in the ground. There's also a physical hardship because of the different load bearing capacity of the made land versus the natural island deposits. So the plan, the objective is to remove all sources of contamination. So any product, any ongoing sources to groundwater, soil, and soil vapor contamination, we have an obligation to remove those sources. And so overall, that we're looking to merge the foundation construction with the environmental remediation. So some sort of stabilization for the deeper contaminants that we will not be able to remove. And those contaminants that are more shallow, that are accessible via traditional excavation methods, we'll excavate those areas, probably do some kind of chemical oxidation to treat the dissolved components in groundwater. And we're still early on in the process, but we're evaluating stabilization techniques for some of the deeper contamination.
Mike, can you speak to where that level is? You mentioned deep, you mentioned shallow. Where do you draw that line, roughly? I'm not going to hold you to it.
Yeah, so I'd say the groundwater table it's relatively shallow, and let's say within 10 feet. So the contaminants that can be removed above the groundwater table will be done so through excavation, and we'll characterize that material and load it in a truck and ship it off to a landfill that's permitted to accept it. The groundwater contamination, so there is dissolved contamination in the groundwater. We're going through pilot studies now to evaluate different remediation technologies, but ultimately we'll probably do some sort of chemical oxidation to break down the volatile constituents in groundwater. And deeper contamination, like I said, some of this is up to 90 feet deep. The DEC, it's unlikely, you're looking at the Gowanus cleanup plans, the contamination there is 150 feet deep, and they're not required to go chasing after that. So we'll have an obligation to stabilize what we can, and part of that will be blending concrete mixtures just to make sure that it's not migrating. So we'll stabilize it in place. And the depth of which we're going to do that, it's certainly not going to be down to 90 feet, but there'll be we'll be looking to remove all sources. So there's tar contamination that extends down, I believe it's like 15 feet. So those areas we'll be looking to stabilize with some kind of grout blend. So we'll manage it in place. And then ultimately, there's going to be residual volatile contamination, and to prevent that from accumulating in the occupied spaces, we're going to have to put some kind of a sub slab ventilation system. So it's essentially like a radon system that's going to prevent any accumulation of those vapors inside the occupied spaces. And there'll be an engineered cover system that's going to cover the entire property. So that'll prevent any human exposure to any residual contamination. That'll be managed in place. And that's going to be managed in perpetuity with a site management plan. And this is an engineered document that we'll prepare, and the DEC, Department of Environmental Conservation, and Department of Health will ultimately sign off on it. And the owner will have an obligation in perpetuity to sign off on these engineering controls on an annual basis.
Thank you, Mike. Jerry?
Thank you, David. A lot of my questions have been asked and have insufficiently been answered, just like the last question. You're working on it. You haven't figured out exactly what you're doing as far as the contamination is concerned, but I'd like to zero in on the last finding E, which is C, which will not alter the essential character of the neighborhood. In your presentation that we saw tonight, you really didn't talk about what the building really looked like. You showed me a cutaway of the dollhouse. You showed me some of it. I saw nothing that would show that you are incorporating any of the architectural vernacular or elements of the old industrial Red Hook. 14 stories is not the old industrial Red Hook. But that aside, I saw nothing that really shows me that you're going to really make it look like it belongs in Red Hook. What I saw from the documentation you provided and was provided to the committee previously via the internet is that this building would look very nice in a downtown, in almost any downtown, but it doesn't really fit in Red Hook. So you haven't told me if it's going to be all glass on the outside, brick, what the materials are, which would go to answering the question that you will at least blend in. And right now, from what I have what I can see, you're not going to be blending in. And the other thing is, if I recall zoning correctly, MIH can only be enforced in the zoning resolution through ULURP. PSA cannot guarantee MIH, cannot guarantee that it will remain affordable, and cannot guarantee any of the proposed number of bedrooms, number of apartments, or anything like that. What guarantees can you offer through a variance that we can hold you to 5, 6, 7 years from now for MIH? And I know AKRF very well, and they do good EISs, but you're still bringing in a lot more traffic. So there are a lot more questions that I see here and have tonight than so far you've answered. But at least tell me what guarantees you're going to offer for MIH. And how is this 14-story building supposed to not alter the essential character of the neighborhoods? At least if you tell me what it's going to look like on the outside. I don't need cutaways. I don't need to know where the apartments are and where the workspaces are. We're looking at the outside right now.
Thank you,
Can I
Jerry.
respond to the question on what the BSA can do to require compliance? And the fact is, BSA actually has very strong enforcement mechanisms. First, they can put conditions in the resolution. They can say the building shall provide 60 affordable apartments at these AMI levels, and they shall record an HPD regulatory agreement against the property within 90 days of the grant, and they shall do this and they shall do that. And all that is, those are all conditions of the grant. Any failure to comply with any one of them would subject you to be having the grant revoked. And so, yes, you are absolutely correct that MIH is in the zoning text, and it's triggered by very specific things. But if the board approves something on a condition, then it's as effective as if city planning required you to record a restrictive declaration. And again, HPD, you will, to the extent that we have affordable, and that's our plan, we will have an HPD regulatory agreement recorded against the property. So you have the BSA resolution, you have the HPD restrictive declaration, you have obviously the goodwill of being a neighbor that says you're going to do something and you're going to do it. And you know, I think that's a lot in terms of enforcement. So in terms of what it's going to look like, obviously that's not my area. Maybe Alex can speak a little bit to the materials we're looking at. And I don't know where they are in necessarily determining that, but cost is always a factor when you're at BSA. So you know, you can't have a gold-plated building and expect that they're going
So
to.
Alex, before you start, thank you, John. Just, you had a long time to present in the beginning, so please be brief here. We still have quite a few people to go through.
Sure. Now let me be very brief then. Yes, no, the building is meant to not be gold plated and fit in with Red Hook, because Red Hook's not a gold plated neighborhood. So on the Conover Street side, we're using red brick. Botanic is probably the most beautiful building in that stretch of the red brick. As you turn down the corner down in Wolcott for where the apartments are, there'll be more of a blonde brick. But again, brick on the facade. Remember, we're trying to build up a streetscape, stay under that 60-foot limit along the street, give it continuity. And then finally, when we get to the west and the more industrial, that's when you get into the industrial sash windows with the steel sash and in a more of a hammered concrete facade panels. So that's trying to fit in portion of the block by portion of the block.
I thank you for all of that. John, I don't know you guys, so please don't take this personally, but goodwill from a developer is something I like to see in writing before they offer it as goodwill. And in your presentation, you did not talk about any guarantees, just that you were planning this. And again, I have some serious thoughts. I have a lot of other thoughts, but I want to hear from other people. Thank you, David, for giving me the time.
Sure. Allison.
Hi, thanks everyone. I just want to say, I mean, I think this project has a lot going for it. And I really like that it's going to be providing good jobs and housing. But I do have some concerns. And, I think Jerry actually just touched on one of my main concerns, which was, how are we guaranteed that the project proposed and if approved by BSA will actually be built and that the proposed uses will be maintained, in the future. So I'm glad to hear that if the BSA, if a variance is given, then it's actually basically like written into the, like you're saying, the covenant of the property. I do have a question about like how you determine the mix of uses that you've come up with in terms of like the percentages of retail versus commercial versus manufacturing, and whether you'd consider maybe adding and making more manufacturing space by taking away some, for example, retail or commercial space, because I think that is a concern that, we are going to be, that we don't want to lose manufacturing space in the neighborhood. You know, as many people have already said, I do think it's too tall. And I would like to see it, you know, see the tower portion kind of redistributed in some way. And then someone else, Victoria actually asked in the chat to ask this question, but she had to leave, so I'll ask it for her. And her question was, you know, would the project work without the residential portion? And whether, in other words, like if the same square footage that you're devoting to residential were, you know, were basically used as either more manufacturing or commercial or anything like that, would the project work without the residential?
Thank you, Allison. All right, so you guys can go ahead and answer that last one.
Yeah, so it's a good question, and it's one the board's going to ask us to study. We're quite certain, and it's one we've studied internally. But the board likes to decide how you study what's called lesser variances. And so when we were preparing this and figuring out what the mix of uses and floor area would be, we studied use only. We studied floor area only. We studied less floor area, but some use. We studied no rear yard equivalent. No one's talking about that, but we have a small bulk variance to start the rear yard a little higher. We studied all these, and we expect that the board will want to see that analysis, but it's premature to do those and then have the board ask you to do 5 more. So the standard that, you know, in our experience is to let the board recommend some lesser variance scenarios, and we expect that we will be able to show that this amount of floor area and these uses and this particular bulk waiver are what will allow us to achieve a reasonable return. But it's a good question.
Thank you. Okay, back to our community, Salvatore Franchino. Ty, are you there? I know
Yeah,
Salvatore is.
hello. All right. Yeah, thanks for letting me speak. Yeah, I just wanted to say that, you know, as a Brooklynite, I do support the project. And just keep in mind, you know, I'm a fairly well-off person, and market rate homes will definitely ease pressure on wealthier people like myself competing with lower income people for scarce housing. So building something like this would actually lower displacement, lower gentrification. So I think that that's a pretty good thing. The only thing I did want more clarity on, though, even though I do support the product as a whole, is just I know there was of the affordable units, I think it's like 2/3 are the 130% AMI, and then 1/3 were the 40 to 60 AMI. And I was just wondering whether or not, like, what's the methodology to arrive at that? And would it be possible somehow, some way to get more affordable units at lower AMI bands, like maybe waiving parking minimums, like make the project cheaper to build? So yeah, that's my question, but overall, I support the project.
We
Thank you,
appreciate
Salvatore.
the comment and the question. And I think we're open to considering other mixes. We think this mix makes sense based on our sort of market data and our understanding of, you know, how to make it work financially. But you know, we expect the board to ask some of these questions, and we are, you know, nothing is set in stone at this point. So we'll take it into consideration. And just from where it came from, you know, not only market data, but, you know, we're modeling one of the MIH standards, because you got to have some standard. And we thought that standard made sense for Red Hook. But I mean, Alex and ownership will, you know, they're open to considering anything that's said at this meeting, including that.
Okay, and I mean, as someone who would not be eligible for one of the affordable units, like, I'm more than happy to take one of those market rate units so that my rent could help support a lower income family to be able to live in nice, new, safe, clean housing with a nice view of Red Hook.
All right, thank you, Salvatore.
Thank you.
Julian, we have, just as everybody knows, we still have 12 more people. Julian Tisch.
I just gave Julian panelist, I guess, status. So Julian, you can unmute yourself.
Can anybody hear me?
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
Okay,
Go ahead.
thank you. I'm not going to rehash the eloquently laid out opposition. A few folks really touched on why this doesn't meet the criteria for a variance, and I support that rationale. I don't think it meets the criteria, but I'm not going to rehash that. I think that's been laid out very well by Benjamin, and a few other folks showed exactly why this isn't deserving of a variance. But I think a bigger issue in general is democratic process. And I want to call everyone's attention to the fact that a similarly out of scale development in Gowanus currently right now has been enjoined by the courts for not providing a passable level of community involvement and input as required by law, because they found that a Zoom meeting, which we are now having, was not a legally satisfying a substitute for a real community meeting, which was required by law. So that project in Gowanus has now been enjoined by the courts and has been stopped because of the lack of meaningful community input. I don't see anything different between that process on Zoom and this process on Zoom. Clearly, there have been lots of things raised by many folks in the community here about why this has not been a democratic process and why the community's voices have not been allowed to be heard in a meaningful way, and certainly not in a legally binding way if we're not going through ULURP. So I just would like to be on the record about that. Developers could respond if they want. I'm not so interested in that, but I do want to make the point that I think this should be looked into in terms of the legality, because if it's not good enough for the Gowanus project and that's been stopped, I think we should potentially look at legal recourses here. And I don't think that is some sort of symbolic, and I don't mean a diss to the folks on the board who are doing a really good job of trying to run the meeting and present the different sides, and I appreciate their efforts. But I don't think that this can be considered a meaningful community engagement. I don't think it passes any kind of test in that respect, and I certainly don't think it's a very democratic format to have. The community is not even on screen. You can't, there's limited time for us to speak, and I think just generally speaking, it's a very slated towards the developers, slated against the community. It's the same reason this was shut down already by the courts in Gowanus, and I think that the same thing should be happening here, because process-wise, this hasn't been fair to the community from the beginning. So I just wanted to say that.
Thank you, Julian. Brad Pearson, Red Hook Relief.
I searched for Brad in the attendee side of the meeting. I can't find him. So Brad, if you're there, send us a message in the chat. And in the meantime, we'll go on to the next person.
All right, Toby Hyde.
All right, Toby, you're a panelist and should be able to unmute yourself here any minute.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Thank you for your time. I think this project is nice conceptually. I'd echo some of Spencer's concerns about parking and Sal's perspective that we should probably aim a little lower or aim for higher, deeper levels of affordability for the affordable units. One thing that's striking to me in the conversation about neighborhood character is, and by the way, I'm a CB6 resident. Not that that should matter in this conversation, but I know it always does. I really do like Red Hook. And one of the things that's so striking about the neighborhood is the mix of uses, historic and current, and certainly current. You have the residential and commercial next to each other, and on the streets adjoining Wolcott, you've got a bunch of residential. You've got residential on the block on Wolcott, I believe, just to the east. You've got residential on the adjacent blocks of Conover. So although it's an IBC, let's not pretend that it's only commercial today. So I guess I'd be curious from the developer's perspective, And two, from the boards, is how you think about what it means to match the character of the neighborhood today. Because I look at this block and I think that's exactly what Red Hook has been for the last X hundreds of years, is a mix and an evolving neighborhood that has matched residential with commercial uses. And it seems in scope to me, it seems really well matched to me in a modern form. So I guess I'd like to, the question is really, how do you think about neighborhood character? And I know there's no single definition.
Well, I think you hit on it.
Thank you, Toby. So John, this could be a very broad answer. If you could just, again, be succinct.
I will be succinct. It's not my strong suit, but so the board, in my experience, looks to uses, historic uses, current uses. They look to bulk. They look to and how far out they go. It just depends on how big the project is. It depends on the nature of the neighborhood, how integrated it is, how isolated it is, and so you'd be hard pressed to distill in neighborhood character into a paragraph or maybe even a book. I mean, the board is going to determine what the neighborhood character is, and then they're going to determine whether we're consistent with it. And so it's hard for me to sit here and answer it, number one, because what I think of it doesn't mean as much as what the board thinks, and even what the community board thinks. I think the board will certainly be guided by what you consider to be the neighborhood character. And I think it'd be helpful for you to assert what you think the neighborhood character is, because the board does look to the community board. They don't only look to the community board, they make their own independent evaluation based on their expertise. But it's a hard question to answer. I think it's the most nebulous of the 5 findings by far. And it's the one that's hardest to predict. But we put professionals on the team who understand neighborhoods, not just in terms of what they look like, but how they operate. And we think we're well within that. But it's for the board to decide and for you to decide.
Thank you, John. Tom, Paul?
All right, Tom, you're promoted to panelist. You should be able to unmute yourself now.
Oh, there we go. Hi.
Go ahead, Tom.
Good, I just found the controls. Okay, great. Thanks, I'll be brief. I I live right across the street from the property, own a building here, and I basically gonna talk about what I said in the chats. I don't know if people read them, but I think that this project is very well intended, and I know that the spirit of it is in line with what is lovable about Red Hook. I know Alex, and I believe that he is good intentioned. I know people have brought up, it's not in writing. Okay, maybe it will be in writing, but I know that it is good intention. He does have good intentions about it within the spirit of the neighborhood that we all love. I stand to be very impacted by this literally on the block where I live and enjoy a beautiful city view and a lot of light and all this stuff. But when I moved here in 2012, I recognized that these are the good old days and change is inevitable. I've seen it happen in many neighborhoods. And the way this neighborhood is going now, with all of these last mile warehouses popping up and the truck traffic, I have a 2.5-year-old kid, and there's a baby wave happening in Red Hook now. There are so many 2-year-olds, 3-year-olds. More trucks is really not what we want here. And as Alex pointed out, without a variance, as of right, unless I don't understand it, this is not my world, but I've been learning, you could do a 300-foot tall warehouse with an FAR of 2 right across the street there, filling the whole block with robots. And that wouldn't bring jobs because it would be mostly robots, and it would bring lots of truck traffic, and it would totally obliterate the skyline in a much more impactful way than this would. My preference would be for Red Hook to stay just the way it is. I love it. The quaint, quiet, you know, fading industrial area that's becoming a little residential hamlet is what attracted it to me. And we all enjoy the charm and the quiet sort of small town vibe here. And I hope that that will remain as we move into the future. But what makes me very sad is the development of all these last mile warehouses all over the place. And we all order, I order on Amazon a lot, and I like stuff coming quickly. So I'm as guilty as anyone else of promoting this type of thing, but it's very much a not in my backyard, please kind of thing. I don't want all the warehouses here. And I suppose that might be what would go in this lot if it's not. And actually, I really like the model block idea. You know, I think that there's some work to do on the affordable aspect of it and how it can serve the community. And there's a lot to be looked at, and this is the first sort of forum in the process. And as I said, I'm not all gung-ho about it because I have an insane view that I love, and I love the quiet here, but I think it's the lesser of two evils. I really do. I think it's actually a beautiful thing in spirit and bringing the community a lot of richness, culture, more restaurants, cool stores. I mean, you know, people, artists, if the studios can be like a place where people can do the Brooklyn artisanal maker stuff that's happening all over the place here now, which I know is the intent, then I'm all for it.
Thank you, Tom. Margaret Jameson.
All right, Margaret, you've been upgraded. You should be able to unmute now.
Hi. I really mentioned this in the chat already, but my main concern is really the height. I find so much, and by the way, we live very close to the proposed site, and we've been here a long time. But you know, it's really the height is the issue. I like the fact that it's going to be multi-use. But you know, once you have a building like this that's 14, 15 stories high, then there's going to be more and more of them. And as much as I think everyone involved in the project has stated how important it is not to create these canyons, I mean, you know, it could still lead to that situation. And it is still flood zone 1. I mean, this is a flood zone 1. And the idea of having a 14, 15 story high residential building, I mean, if this zone needs to be evacuated, that's an issue, despite whatever resilient practices, you know, you've put in terms of the construction. So I really think the issue in terms of, you know, my support is really the height. I mean, I don't see why it has to be that high. Why do you have to have the tower? You know, that's pretty much all I wanted to say.
Thank you, Margaret. Alexia Nazarian.
Alexia, you've just been promoted and should be able to unmute yourself now.
Oh, hi. Great. I was about to log off because this has been a very long meeting. I just want to say that I support the project. Alex, you gave a great presentation.
Alexia.
Yeah, sorry about that. I appreciate that you're a resident and an urban planner, and it's clear to me that you're pursuing this project to give back. I just want to say a couple things to keep it brief. I'm confused why anybody here who would consider themselves an environmentalist or a progressive would have any issue about the height of the building. This has been discussed in the chat, but if you care about climate change, you should be welcoming this density. there was also this question, as there are often in these meetings, about the community. And for what it's worth, I am a CB6 resident, but we're an interconnected city, and it really shouldn't matter. And in fact, you know, I'd like to know how many members of the community are here. I think it was about 100. You know, let's think about the members of the community that aren't consulted. Not only people who live here now, but the people who would live in the 210 apartments that will get built as a result of this project. So yeah, I support it. I think it's great. I second, you know, bike parking, indoor bike parking. And that's all. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Alexia. Jay Solomon from the Southwest Brooklyn Industrial Development Corporation. I don't know if you're going to repeat what Ben Margolis already said. But.
Yeah, I searched for that name too. They're not here. If they are under some other name or on a phone, you know, leave a message in the chat and we'll get back to you.
All right. Ben Carlos Stipin.
All right, Ben, I just promoted you to a panelist. You should be able to unmute yourself now.
Hey, everyone, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, thank you all for your time this evening. This has been a very interesting presentation. I want to comment on a few things. And first, I'd like to echo the gentleman that talked about the trade-offs in terms of, you know, if it's between a last mile warehouse and residential, he'd rather have this. And I can say that, you know, I'm an industrial real estate broker. This is a good last mile warehouse site. And I think the board really needs to reckon with the choice in front of them that, you know, this is the future. You know, let's say even if you get Carlos Menchaca and the city to agree to a ULURP, to start a ULURP tomorrow to rezone this to prevent last mile warehouses, that's going to take years to get in place. So if this project is not get approved, more trucks are coming to Red Hook. Second, I'd like to address the gentrification comments that have been made several times and point out that this particular census tract, which I should note does not include the NYCHA complexes, is quite wealthy. The median household income is well over $100,000 a year. I think the idea that this project would gentrify Red Hook is pretty ridiculous on its face. And lastly, I would like to say that I echo Alexia's comments on the environmentalism and fully support the project. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ben. Jackie Painter.
Jackie, you've just been upgraded. You should be able to unmute yourself now.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, okay, great. I'm so sorry about that. Of course, I get called on the minute I try to leave for the restroom. But basically, I just wanted to say that we definitely are in a housing crisis. That's no surprise to anyone. As several people in this call know, my mother was displaced from this neighborhood, and my family had to move out after Hurricane Sandy. With new developments moving in, rents rose astronomically. I believe a lot of people who live here now can't afford it. I know I can't, but we're still here. And so my number one priority is always protecting our community and our people and making sure that we do give our people the best possible opportunity for affordable housing. Especially right now in this housing crisis, especially our neighbors in NYCHA who are paying a high amount of rent for unacceptable conditions, all of our neighbors throughout the district, we need to come through for our community first. And I want to make sure that this process is a truly community-centered approach that benefits the community. I definitely agree with everything that's been said about more meetings and more input. But I have just a couple questions about this project. I also emailed the community board, so you can have them as well. But first, affordable housing is the #1 priority, like I just said. And that for such a large project, I personally would like to see more units be truly affordable. For 20%, 30% AMI in this proposal of these units, I would like to also see more of the 2-bedroom and 3-bedroom family units, and not just studios, because I do believe that oftentimes luxury developments offer studio affordable units as a way to minimize mandatory inclusionary housing. And so going on that, my question is, the developer, are you willing to change these unit plan and scheme to add more affordable units? Or maybe do more, I was looking at the documents, perhaps do more impact studies like financial comparisons between different family incomes in Red Hook, as well as like a racial impact study. And with this in mind, because we didn't go through the Euler process, is the developer willing to do a CBA with us to ensure that we're having these community conversations, making sure that our communities were to get these affordable units, et cetera?
Thank you, Jackie. John, you want to answer that briefly?
Briefly, I think we can open the dialogue on, I think, everything you said there. Just with respect to the racial impact study, this is something that's going around a lot, and we certainly expected to have a conversation about it. But I think if either the board members or community wants to have that conversation, I think we need to understand exactly what people are looking for, because there's legislation, there are people that talk about legislation outside this jurisdiction. The Seeker Technical Manual, which AKRF uses to do its studies, doesn't have standards right now. So if we're going to do something, we want to be responsive to what you're asking for, but without something more than just, just the word racial impact study, it's hard for us to commit to do that. But we would absolutely commit to talking more with the community and with the community board about everything you said.
Thank you, John.
David, if I may
yes.
interrupt, it's 9
Of course.
o'clock. I think we
Yeah.
should move on to the committee and see what we want to do with this matter today.
Okay, we only had 3 people left, but okay.
Well,
Do they have anything new to
do
say?
you want to switch to committee questions? You go back to what you did before?
That's what I'm
Well, the
asking
I had
for.
my hand
Well, the only person I had up was Ariel, whose hand was up, and she. All these people have been
I've been
waiting
raising my
2
hand
hours.
every time.
Hold on, Bob. These people have been waiting for 2 hours since they posted their.
So have I.
If
name.
there are only a few left, let's give them an opportunity. I hope
All
they
right,
have
so-
something new to say.
So to the 3 that I'm going to call, please be brief and to the point. Sorry they had to wait this long. Douglas Hanow.
Douglas, you've been promoted and should be able to unmute now.
Yes, hi, my name is Douglas Hanna. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I've lived in CB6, Brooklyn, for 23 years. I've raised my children here. I have 2 teenage daughters. For 23 years, this community board has denied and denied and denied new development, new affordable development, new mixed income development, new energy efficient development, all in the name of materiality, contextualness, and a lot of other things. My 2 teenage daughters do not care about materiality. They do not care about context. What they care about is climate change, and what they care about is justice. And they're the generation that will live here. And I do not want to see them live in 190-year-old housing that was not built to withstand climate change. I would love to hear what this project's energy efficient features are. I'm sure they're amazing. I think we have to, not we, you have to approve this, and we have to approve every new dense, energy efficient, modern project, or this community board, and me included, because I'm an old, like you guys are. Lived here 23 years. I'm in my 50s. I'm a lifelong New Yorker. And we're going to die due to climate because we're counting sizes of windows and height. We need to give people, new people, the opportunity to move into this fantastic community in dense, energy efficient, beautiful new housing. So I'd love to find out what energy efficient features there are in this building. Thank you.
Alex, you want to field that one? Oh, here.
Yeah, sorry. Whoever did, I don't know if it's gonna be a lead project, passive house, if you could just say something to that.
Yeah, no, it won't be passive house. It's going to be very high efficient. I'm sure we're going to exceed some of the LEED standards. But it's going to have good insulation and be using very, very high efficiency units for heating and cooling, and have a lot of good thermal mass. It's going to have solar panels, and then the battery system that we have to pull in power during the night, use it during the day, and basically try to be as sustainable and resilient as we can. I'd love to get into those on a more point by point basis, but I know it's, we have limited time right now. But
Yeah,
but absolutely.
thank you, Alex. That's great. Chrissy.
Thank you.
There's only one Chrissy on the attendee side, Chrissy Nagy. I just upgraded you. You should be able to unmute now.
Yeah, the email is bkbumpkin@gmail.
Yes, hi, thank you. Most people already said what I'd like to say, but I do find that this problem of the character of the neighborhood is really one that I think we need to focus on. I do believe that this project would fundamentally change the character of the neighborhood. As many of us know, Red Hook is a neighborhood that is comprised of mostly 3- and 4-story units, whether it's commercial or residential. The fact that this is proposing to be 14 stories tall, I think it sets a precedent more than just having one sky-high building. It will set precedents for other developers to come in here and do the same. And just by the very fact that it's unlike the rest of New York City, where there's ample large, skyscraper type buildings, this is what I think has always set Red Hook apart, and that previous developers have been very cautious and have kind of kept that in mind when building, and they've abided by the current zoning laws and restrictions and haven't tried to circumvent the city council to make this happen. So I'm against the height of the building. I also question the self-imposed hardship. I do believe that, as Mr. Washburn himself stated, being a longtime resident, he knew full well when he purchased the property that it wasn't suitable for a large-scale development, and that all of Red Hook is fairly toxic. I also, I am someone who believes in climate change and justice, but I just don't see how doing anything other than adding more sewage to the neighborhood, adding more cars, adding more anything could, just because you're building something that only has to apply by current standards for energy efficient buildings, would make it a green building. That to me seems nonsense. So I would be opposed to this project as it currently stands. I would, however, be in favor of a much more modest building that does not change the character of the neighborhood, that would be more in the 3 to 5-story realm.
Thank you, Chrissy. All right, the last person I have on the list is Derek Schlesselman.
Derek, I just upgraded you to the panel. You should be able to unmute now.
Hi, thank you very much for taking the time to let us speak during this hearing. My name is Derek Schlesselman. I am a relatively new resident here in Red Hook. I've only been here for 17 years, and I've been a manufacturing business owner here for 9 years. And I'm 100% behind affordable housing, but affordable housing means nothing in a city in which people can't afford affordable housing. Jobs are the most important thing to allow for affordable housing to exist. And I feel the pressure as a manufacturing business as rents go up higher and higher every year. My rent is pushing me out of the city if I can't find something affordable in, New York City. I guess just to get to the point, I have so many questions for the developers. I can't possibly explain them all here, but I would love to have the developers release their pre-purchase business plans to demonstrate that they didn't have the full intention before they purchased to include residential development in this project, knowing full well that it was a manufacturing IBZ zone. And two, I'm wondering I think that one of the earlier commenters talked about the fact that manufacturing and residential are inherently opposed. And I would like to know what performance standards the manufacturers are going to be held to, and how is it that the business practices of the industrial users won't disrupt the residential tenants above. And my last question is how there's lots of things in zoning law and zoning code that talk about residential affordability, but there's nothing about manufacturing affordability. I would like to know what the rents, the developer avoided this question earlier in the hearing. I would like to hear what the rents are going to be for manufacturers, and how these units won't just be boutique spaces for people who are not actual manufacturers hiring actual Red Hook residents for actual jobs. I can go on all night. I'll let the panel take back my time.
So thank you, Derek. Question 3 has been answered. Question 2, John, if you could answer that briefly.
Oh, sorry, I got caught up thinking about question 3. What's question 2?
How the manufacturing uses don't disturb the residences above.
So, good. I have a good answer for that. So, these mixed use districts, these are actually very common in the city right now. So, I don't know, 20 years ago, Alex would know better than I would, but the MX district started proliferating Long Island City, some in the Bronx. The idea of locating manufacturing, even adjacent to residential, is not new. And there are performance standards in the zoning and in the code. And we expect to exceed those standards and also I think the way they've laid out the building, some of the more intense uses are down on the base, and the people are going to be living up in the central area. So, I'm not an architect and I'm not an engineer, and we have them here. So if you want to talk very specifics, I'm sure we could.
This is an M2 zone. And
Derek, I'm sorry, we just cannot get into this detailed discussion at 10 after 9. I would suggest, if I'm guessing where this is going to go, that you contact the development team directly and have a conversation. I think it's a good question, but John is right. There are things that are already codified, and they have to follow the rules. So at this point, I'm going to move it back to the panel. Bob Levine.
Thank you. A couple of questions. On your end result for the environmental cleanup, what are you looking for? I mean, it's like, we're not looking to swim in the iguanas, but there are different grades of things that levels of what is clean. Will you be able to have a garden in the area, for instance?
Thank you, Bob. Mike, if you're going to answer this, which I'm thinking you are, 1 paragraph or less.
Yeah, it's going to be a restricted residential cleanup, meaning there will be deed restrictions on the use of the property. You will be able to plant a garden, but not for commercial purposes.
Perfect. Thank you. Ariel?
Oh, that was
it. I'm sorry. Wait a minute. Bob, do you have another question?
Yeah.
All right. Last one. Okay.
All right. The idea that the project isn't self-imposed is an important point. You did a nice viewpoint of the model of a model block, but that's your choice to decide that. to me, that's self-imposed. I mean, you went through, well, it's going to be 300 jobs or whatever number you gave, and therefore that's how many people have to live there. If you don't go by that, you don't have to have then a 15-story building to take care of the number of people that will be working there. So that in a sense is you're imposing your own set of rules on there to get to that. You know, could this be done without that look? If you just did it in M2 in there without having to make sure that everybody lives there, is that a possibility?
That's a pretty yes or no question, John.
Well, I think the answer is no. We studied doing an as of right last mile warehouse 2.0 FAR in accordance with M2 zoning. We determined that it wouldn't make a reasonable return. Just to respond to self-imposed hardship, that actually refers just to the physical condition. So like classic example is you subdivide your lot and say, I have a small lot. I sold off my other piece. That's my self-imposed. That's the hardship that could be self-imposed. Just as a way of.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Bob. Ariel?
Yeah, I apologize if this was asked before because I've been traveling and I didn't hear everything, but the financial hardship, you keep referring to the last mile warehouse. There's an awful lot of uses that could be made and built in an M district. And so I'm just wondering why you only studied one and why you didn't attempt, you know, even it sounds like the bulk of the building is not an issue. You wouldn't, sounds like you don't even need to ask for more FAR in a manufacturing zone, but it doesn't sound like you studied other options. Or did you?
So in short, we chose, the board requires that you do the highest and best use you can do as of right. And so our, you know, Jack's financial analysis reflects that a last mile warehouse is the most profitable per square foot to build as of right. And so that's the one we studied. The board may ask us to do something else. They may want us to study, I don't know, robotics manufacturing. I don't know how much that makes per square foot, but they might ask us to do that.
But it's a shame. And you say, you know, you're offering to do affordable housing when that's not required. You're offering to do an awful lot of exciting things in this building that are very exciting. There's an awful lot of exciting manufacturing possible developments that could also happen, which don't seem to have be something that you were looking at, because this is, you know, if it was just for the building, that's fine. The project's great. This is an IBZ, and this is the end of the IBZ. This would be the end of the IBZ. You start doing this. So that's the issue. Why not be that creative about manufacturing uses?
Thank you, Ariel. John, there's no question to answer there. So Mark, I turn it over to you.
Mark.
You're muted, Mark.
You're on mute, Mark.
Boy, I was better off when I was on mute. I'm going to call on Jerry now to make a motion. We can then discuss or amend or agree or disagree with that motion, but that will get us within the committee to reach a resolution with regard to our ultimate feeling about this project.
Thank you, Mark.
You're welcome, Jerry.
It's a pleasure. At the beginning of the meeting, I had an hour's notice. Now I had
many more hours notice.
Okay. The motion is that we recommend to BSA to reject this application, and I don't have the application number in front of me that can be filled in for the following reasons. It does not meet it does not meet point number E, which is that the variance requested is the minimum number to afford, relief. Based on their financials, they could be doing other things, including a more modern manufacturing / warehouse, so that this is not the least that they could do. The least would be a smaller building, or even stay within the manufacturing zone, within the manufacturing zoning district and look for a larger building that way. Two, it will alter the essential character of the neighborhood for the following. The building is out of scale with the rest of Red Hook. Red Hook consists of 4, 5, actually 3, 4, or 5-story buildings. This is 14 stories, 15 stories, and at that height, it is very out of character. It is also out of character to bring a residential, even if it's a mixed-use building, within the IBZ. The IBZ was set up to promote and preserve manufacturing within the city and specifically within Red Hook and Sunset Park. It's all one big IBZ. This proposal will open the door for additional variances within the IBZ and will destroy what the IBZ is designed to do. And the last item is that I'm going to let it go with those two.
I will second that motion.
Okay.
Does anybody want to make a comment with regard to the motion stated by Jerry?
I guess I'd like to make a comment that I'd be willing to reconsider the application if they took into account some of the feedback they got tonight and wanted to represent to us at a later date.
Might I suggest that we make comments?
I would support that as well.
That would be fine if
That's
they
a
wanted to come
given.
back, but our role tonight is to vote on the presentation and the project as presented. If they
I understand, but I was just asked to make a comment, so.
Yeah, if they wish to withdraw from BSA, resubmit with a modified plan, I'd love to hear from them.
Yeah, I'll take the liberty of chiming in myself here. Listen, to me, this sounds like an ideological, concept-driven pilot project, but it doesn't have any zoning concept behind it. It hasn't been studied in that kind of context by city planning. It's not that I don't like this project. I am probably one of the only people on this board who says 15 stories may not be enough. That if we did more, that would be great in terms of creating more affordable housing at lower levels of AMI. But that's not what this is, and that's not what this can become. This is driven by a concept for a model block, but that's not what we're in the business of doing. That's what the City Planning Commission is in the business of doing in terms of creating new zoning concepts. And I would be opposed to this project for that reason, and I will support Jerry's motion.
Mark.
Anybody else?
Mark, I'm almost with you there. Surprisingly, I'm almost with you. If this was being proposed, say, between 3rd and 4th Avenue in Gowanus, a little outside the flood zone, this is beautiful. The mixed use. This is what we wanted for Gowanus, but maybe not right up against the water. My biggest problem here is that it's in the IBZ, and boy, we've got to hold the line on the IBZ.
Anyone else want to comment?
Bob has his hand up.
Go ahead, Bobby.
Yeah, I just fully agree with Glenn. Nothing new, but that you said I'm all for mixed use, and I'm for exactly what they're talking about. But it's in the wrong place. It doesn't belong on that block in the IBZ. That's all.
Anybody else?
Mark, I see that Judith and Joanna both have their hands up.
Oh.
Okay, pick one of them.
Judith, go ahead. I saw your hand up.
I agree with Jerry. I think his thoughts are really well thought out, and I think it's completely out of character with the neighborhood. And I think it's a false suggestion that, oh, you're going to get a 3-story warehouse, and you're not going to get a 300-story tall warehouse because you've got a much lower FAR. So I think you're trying to scare us, and I can't go along with that.
Joanna?
I just wanted to boost what Mark said, that this entire conversation belongs in a different venue, and that we have to insist as a community board that planning, DOT, DEP, anyone else who wants to weigh in from the city level, handle this kind of change of use. You know, no judgment on whether it's good or bad. I happen to think density is great. You know, there are many things about this project. Mixed use is great. We want to see this kind of thing in our neighborhoods, but this is not the right place to make these decisions. I wish that Jerry's motion could somehow touch on all of the wonderful subtleties of the conversation we've had tonight. I've been really impressed with people from the community and people on the community board expressing their views in a very clear and respectful way.
I agree. We have to specifically mention the IBZ.
Right. I think we can do that within the letter that Michael will prepare with the help of Mark and David to cover what was said and where we think that this would fit, and everything that was said tonight. There were, I don't know if the term hundreds of comments tonight would fit if you take each one from some of the people, that 3 or 4, but there were some very, very good comments. And they should somehow not be lost in the.
I absolutely agree, Jerry. I absolutely agree. We have a history at the community board of not just writing a letter that reflects a final vote, but reflects the nuances of what people say within the context of those votes. And I will endeavor to do that. I hope Michael will endeavor to do that, or David. I hope I don't have to. But I also, you know, and Johanna had said before, how about a variance with regard to the number of parking spaces? And they said, well, that would be a variance too far. No, that would be a variance that would be really good. So, you know, there are more things to say about projects, but I support your motion as is.
Mark, we have 3 other people with their hands up.
Are they members of the committee?
They are.
Then they have a right to talk.
Daniel?
On the motion.
Yeah, I'll just speak very briefly. I must confess I'm very torn on this one. I find this project very attractive. I am very concerned about the alternative as of right and what may be coming down the pike. But I, you know, in terms of the standards we have to apply, in terms of the 5 points, I find myself having to agree with Jerry's motion on both points.
Thank you, Daniel. Allison?
Am I muted? Oh, hi. Yeah, I mean, I guess Daniel basically said what I was going to say more or less, but you know, I do like this project, and I do, you know, I just wish there was, you know, a way for them to take into account, you know, many of the valid concerns that we have about, you know, some of the aspects of it, right? You know, and ask them to come back and represent to us. So, you know, I don't know how we do that. You know, in terms of the findings, I think I disagree with Jerry's motion that it is not contextual to Red Hook. I mean, I feel like it is very much in the spirit of Red Hook. And, you know, I mean, yeah, I mean, that's my only comment. But, you know, I do, you know, understand that there are issues, and I do believe that there are, you know, there are things that they can improve on to reflect the, you know, the community's desires a little more.
All right, thank you. Judith?
No, I would want to call the question, so.
Well, okay, let's got a couple more hands. Madeline?
Okay.
Could you withdraw that, Judith?
Yes, I withdraw it.
Thank you.
Madeline, you're mute. Yeah, there you go. Can't hear you.
Can't hear you.
We can't hear you. I think it looks like you're unmuted, but your mic's not working. We can barely hear you.
You're
Allison,
in the
can you
grand-
put is your hand up again, Allison? Okay, good.
No.
Sorry, Maddie, it's not working. I'm
Not
just
the
gonna go to
static.
Jerry. Jerry, go ahead.
I just want to say, I think the developer or developers or whatever the team would like to be, the team does have a chance to resubmit to BSA and to us. I think everything that was said here tonight with the modifications, suggestions and changes, I think is something that we would love to see. And I'm not going to detail what those changes could be, but unfortunately we have in front of us this 15-story building. If they want to come back, it's their option to withdraw or ask for a postponement from BSA and resubmit with a different design, which takes into account almost everything that was said here tonight, from reducing the parking to bicycle parking, into interior bicycle parking and everything else.
Okay.
But unfortunately, we're stuck with what we have in front of us.
Okay.
Now you can call the question, Judith.
I'll call it.
All those in favor of the motion to disapprove the application, please indicate by raising your hand in the chat if you can.
Please use the raise hand button if you have it. Judith, I saw you raised your hand, but it's not clear. Here we go.
Button to work right, so my hand is up, please.
Raised it to raise my hand in favor of the motion.
Mine too.
I raised my hand. Anybody need more time to find the raised hand function or to say what they think, or?
You can't say what you think.
No, I mean in terms of yay or nay.
Mark, I can count at least 12 hands raised.
Okay.
It's unclear.
Anybody
exactly.
else need more? Anybody else need more time? All those who reject the motion, please raise your hand now. And everybody who had the hand raised, please take your hand down.
Jerry?
I'm taking it down. I'm taking it down. I'm taking it down.
I don't see any hands raised right now.
And how many people do we have attending from the committee?
Yeah, it looks like it's 12 zip.
Okay, thank
Everyone
you.
who's attended.
I'm sorry, the motion to reject it will disappoint you guys. I really do think you've done a wonderful job in presenting. I think you're a tremendously professional group of people. And I hope you've heard what the comments were and either move ahead and still try to incorporate the concepts or move back from the project and try to resubmit it. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your time and your attention.
Thank you.
Good night, everybody, and have a nice evening.
Good job, everybody.
Thank you, everybody. It took a while.
Night,
but
everyone.
we
Thanks, everyone.
made